Welcome to the podcast, Lorne.
Hey, Michelle. Glad to be together with you over whatever we call this technology. I think yours is Riverside.
Riverside.
I had a good time interviewing you for my Conscious Fertility Podcast. So I'm looking forward to having more conversations with you because that was a lot of fun for me.
It was a lot of fun for me too. And I actually, it was really, really nice and to see that we have very similar views just on reality and health and fertility. Yeah. And it was a lot of fun. And so last week, actually, for everybody listening, that was the first time we actually officially met via Zoom.
Yeah, but we know each other. We're part of the ABORM, right? The acupuncture, exactly. TCM, reproductive board of medicine. And but yeah, like the first time you and I had real conversation rather than chat conversation.
Which is awesome. I really enjoyed it. And I think that we're so aligned in so many ways. I think that we both love the whole bridging of science and spirituality. We're kind of nerds in that department. Yeah. So for people listening, I would love if you can introduce yourself. I know we started out with very different backgrounds and went into acupuncture. You have like kind of a similar, because you started in accounting, right?
Yeah. So I am a CPA, so a certified professional accountant. Back in the day, they were called chartered accountants in Canada. And because of health issues and having such a response to Chinese medicine in particular, eventually I was one of the controllers and tax guys at this time with Ocean Spray Growers here in BC. And I left that position so I could go back to school and study Chinese medicine as my second career. So that's kind of a little bit about my background. And then
how did you get into that? Like what made you think about doing Chinese medicine?
I was ill. I had, back in the day, this is in the 80s and early 90s. So this Chinese medicine wasn't as available. This was before the websites, right, where you could really see what other people were doing and learning. And so I had severe gut issues, diagnosed as IBS, chronic fatigue, candida. And, I got scoped through each end and eventually, and I tried different Western approaches, and eventually it was the Chinese herbal medicine actually that dramatically changed it. So much so, I have some memories. I did a Bachelor of Science first in math. That was my first thing. Mm-hmm. Then I went and did accounting in McGill, and then I went and became a CPA. Back then, CA. They changed the letters for the designation, and I remember when I was at McGill, I was already seeing alternative medicine doctors, in particular Chinese medicine. And I remember for the first time how much clarity, because I didn't realize how much brain fog I had. And so the clarity I had, I was in the classroom, I just realized how easy things were going in, and I was just remembering things. And I just felt like things were almost in slow motion in a good way, like a professional athlete when they can see the court. And physically, I just felt I had so much endurance, so much energy. I was just, I felt great. And, when you've been feeling poorly for so long, I thought that was normal.
Right.
And then exactly. I got, the illness was so bad while I was early days in my accounting studies at McGill. It interfered with my studies. It interfered with my life. I almost couldn't get out of bed sometimes with the fatigue and the brain fog. And so I had an aunt who was into this stuff. Mm-hmm. I wasn't, right? Remember, it came from Bachelor of Science, math, and Duke County. I think I was always open-minded. Look what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But it wasn't kind of on my radar. And she's the one that suggested I see her Chinese herbalist. And, I was desperate. I was living in Montreal, Canada. She was living in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. So I got on a plane and flew to see her person because I wouldn't know who to go see back then. And, through dietary changes and herbal medicine, it transformed my life. And funny story, because, I do acupuncture like you do. I always had a fear of needles, right? I never was a big fan of needles. So the first time I was getting acupuncture, the acupuncturist who treated me, I have everybody lying down, but he had me sitting up on the table, right? On the treatment table, I was sitting. and he's putting these needles in me, and he's like, "Are you okay?" I guess he could see I was going a little green,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm trying to be, tough guy, and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." Next thing I know, flop, I passed out on the
Yeah,
table.
people do. They
So
start sweating.
yeah, so now I receive it. I love it. Now I give it. But I did, it's a mind over matter, right? I did have that fear of needles, which is why I started with the herbal medicine. Most people like, oh, I'll do acupuncture, but they maybe have an aversion to the herbs or the taste of the herbs. I was the other way around. I got introduced to Chinese medicine through the herbal medicine. And
Mhm.
then I was like, oh, I'll try the acupuncture too. I stuck with it, obviously. And eventually went back to school, and now I can I receive it, and I can give it, and I have so much compassion for those who have a fear of needles. But
Mhm.
usually, if they come in and try it, they realize it doesn't feel like needles that you're getting.
Right,
And
right.
now with technology, I have low-level laser systems as well, so I can do laser acupuncture for those people that just cannot experience acupuncture because it's so stressful for them.
Yeah, for sure. So that's one of the things, or sometimes starting them out with baby needles, because the baby needles are really, really, really super thin. You could barely feel it, and
Yeah,
then eventually they'll go up.
I just give them the acupuncture for the first time, and they're nervous, but they let me put in one needle, then another, then a third, and that's all I'll
Mhm.
do for the first visit for people who have a big phobia.
Yeah,
Um, but like you and I know, and those that have received it, it's not like getting a needle at the doctor when you get a shot or blood drawn, and so you really, once they're in, it takes like a minute to put them in. Then you go into beautiful rest la la land for 30 to
yes,
45 minutes on the table. So all worth it for most.
totally, totally worth it for sure. So talk about why you got into fertility
Well,
specifically.
yeah, and I'll keep it short, but it was never my intention. My intention was to treat gut issues, digestive issues, because that's what brought me to the medicine. So I thought I'd be, and that's what I set out to do: IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's, colitis, severe bloating, constipation, diarrhea, that kind of stuff is what I thought I would be seeing. And I did see a lot of that. And in our medicine, when we treat, we do a very detailed history, and we treat holistically. So we can't just focus on the gut health. Just like for fertility, we don't just focus on the women's ovaries, right? We focus holistically. And so most people that come to health professionals back then, and I started in 2000, and now still are female. And so I'd always do a menstrual history, and the menstrual history is such a great guide for health, right? We can get so
Yeah,
much information. That's why I prefer treating women over men. I treat both, but women who are menstruating help me diagnose them from a Chinese medicine perspective, because I
true.
get so much information from their cycle history. And so as I was treating their bloating and their IBS, or they're alternating between, constipation and diarrhea, or even colitis and Crohn's symptoms, um, they noticed their PMS went away. They noticed their menstrual pain went away, their irregular bleeding, the spotting, all those things changed. So I became popular with women's health in general. So I was just doing women's health. So I was seeing people with perimenopause and menopausal symptoms, and with painful periods. That was what I was seeing. And back then, again, the web wasn't a popular thing. I was advertising a magazine with a focus in women's health. And this woman who found me was going through an IVF, and she was going to see one of our colleagues, Randine Lewis, in Houston. So
Hmm.
I'm in Vancouver, and she flew to Houston to see Randine, because this was before Zoom.
Hmm.
And Randine told her she needs regular acupuncture at least once a week. So
Hmm.
she's going to, and herbal medicine. So she has to find somebody local, because it wasn't reasonable or cost effective for her to fly weekly to Houston from Vancouver, right?
Hmm.
And so nobody was focusing on fertility, but she found me women's health. So she
Hmm.
came to my clinic and told me her story, and asked if I'd be willing to follow Randine's acupuncture prescriptions and her herbal suggestions and do that for her in Vancouver. And I kind of said, cheekily, but in a funny way, in a cute way, as a non aggressive way. So basically, you want me to be like a monkey and put the points where Randine tells me, and prescribe the herbs where Randine, how Randine tells me. She goes, yeah. And I'm like, I'm in. That sounds great. I get to learn from somebody, because what our audience
Yeah.
doesn't know, Randine was already focusing in fertility, And she had already had this draft book, which came out shortly after, called The Infertility Cure, first of many of her
Great
books.
book.
So I thought it was a great opportunity to be able to learn from somebody with more experience, and not have responsibility to the outcome. And then women who are going through IVF and struggling with fertility, they talk. And by 2004, I only would take reproductive health issues. That was all I would take because I was too busy. And I started hiring associates and training them because I couldn't handle the load myself. Now, here we are recording this in 2025. I have multiple associates in our clinic and that do focus on fertility. And myself personally, I still see a lot of reproductive health, but I'm so into the conscious work now.
Yeah,
because I have low-level laser therapy that we use for fertility, but I use that for so many other things, brain health, pain injury, and I do a lot with perimenopausal symptoms. So I would say, and half my practice when I look at my schedule is conscious work, right? It's that mind body work. Half my practice is that. They still get acupuncture and low-level laser therapy as part of the treatment, but they're coming in with, I'm wanting belief change work. And I do see a lot of reproductive health, but I see everything now. So it's kind of gone full circle because of the conscious work, because conscious work is my passion. And so whoever comes in the door that's looking for change, they may want a relationship change or want a relationship, job changes, finances, they want a baby, they want a healing. Basically, they want to be happy, and they realize they can't get it from the outside. So they're looking for help on the inside to have that transformation. And that's why we use it for fertility, because it's such a powerful tool. When you can heal the mind, the body follows really well.
Yeah, no doubt. So talk about the conscious work specifically. What does it entail?
Yeah, well, I'm trained also as a clinical hypnotherapist, and I've done a lot of what they call energy psychology modalities. So I'm trained in Psych-K, emotional freedom technique, Bankston healing method, energy type medicine. But from the clinical hypnotherapy perspective, and what I would call conscious work, it's inner work. It's waking up to your true nature. It's waking up to what some people would call higher self, what they would call consciousness, witness consciousness. You'd have to be open and appreciate that there's more to this world than meets the eyes. And so we have a Newtonian science world, what's considered a materialistic world. And those are things that we can kind of measure. And then there's the science, and the new science called quantum physics, which understands there's so much more to this reality than what we see. And when you have these shifts inside, it has your perception to the world. You see it differently. And you can think of it as if you live in a building, let's say your life is a building, on the first floor, if that's where you live, you're going to have a certain perspective of what your neighborhood is. And it's going to be very limited because you can only see from the first floor. And as you move up, if it's a 20-story building, if you live above 10 and you start to live on the 15th floor, you have a different perspective of what is in your neighborhood than the person who lives on the first floor. And so conscious work is about kind of getting to a different perspective. We know, through so much more research now, that we perceive the world through the lenses of our subconscious programming, and so how we see the world is through the lens of our subconscious. And that subconscious programming is inherited and imprinted on us, like literally a few generations before. We know this through research on Holocaust survivors and their children and grandchildren. And we know this through the cherry blossom study on mice, where they were stressed and traumatized, and it got passed down to their grandpups. I won't go into the study because
memory and DNA.
Yeah, it gets tagged. It's not a genetic mutation; it's a tag. So it can one generation get tagged, and one generation you can heal it. So you see the world through the lens of your subconscious, and that lens is based on your history. And so I heard a teacher of consciousness once say, reality is white snow. Let's pretend that. And then you have red glasses. I have orange glasses. Some of the listeners have blue, green, white, yellow. We're all seeing white snow, but we're all experiencing it, perceiving it differently because of our lens. And if we want to have a different experience to see that reality, we got to change our lens.
Yes.
We're both fans of Joe Dispenza, right?
Yes, we are. We're Joe Dispenza groupies.
Yeah,
we've been to a couple of them.
I like his retreats and his books. And in his book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, I think it's where he said it. I've read all of his books and been to many retreats, but I really liked how he said your personal reality is based on your personality.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't have, how do you expect to change? How do you expect to have a different reality if you bring your current personality into your future? You're going to get the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is about having that shift, because, we're going kind of into a rabbit hole here, but if you're open
It's
for it.
okay. No, I'm totally open for it. And my listeners are used to it.
Okay. So, it's either Lao Tzu or Gandhi. I've seen this quote attributed to both, but it kind of goes like, your beliefs lead to your thoughts, which lead to your feelings, which lead to your actions and behaviors, which lead to your habits, which leads to your destiny.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they're saying is your behaviors are always congruent with your beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And when they conflict, the belief is going to win. And if you do a behavior long enough, it becomes your habit, so it becomes your reality. So we often want to go and work on the outside world. We often want to go work on a behavior, but the behavior stems from a belief or a program, often unconscious. And so we'll self-sabotage ourselves. Even though we really want to lose that weight, we go and we diet, we exercise, but that's a behavior. But if you have a program that, I'm not beautiful, right? Or I'm not thin enough, then the subconscious wants congruency, and it will find a way to sabotage that. Consciously or unconsciously, it will happen. And so rather than going to work on the behavior, we go to work on the program, and then it flows down and the behavior changes naturally.
It's so true. And it's almost that, that saying, whether you think, whether you think you can or can't, you're right.
You're right. Yeah.
Because it's just a matter of what we choose. And I think the key with this is that people don't even realize, it's almost like they're so asleep in the Matrix. The Matrix is such a great movie, by the way, because of that reason. It really shows us how, if we just knew that that was the case, that we had those beliefs and it impacts our reality, then we would make a difference. But I think the problem is not even knowing that it's even there.
Yeah, well, of course. And I don't know if the ages changed, but it was my observation that around age 40, people start to realize that they need to do their inner work. The drug doesn't work anymore. The antidepressant isn't working, or they're in a third relationship. It's not working. They change cities. Like, it's not working. Changing the outside is only temporary.
Right.
So somewhere around 40, maybe it's younger now because things seem to be speeding up, mm-hmm. but around age 40, people come in there and they don't know what they're looking for, but they know they're looking for it. And you and I have language for this, right? They're looking for inner work, conscious work, mm-hmm. but they kind of know that I know by getting a new relationship's not going to help. I got it. Something's not right about me. And I'm going to give an example, because the relationship one comes up a lot in my practice when people come and see me. And I share this as an example of self-sabotaging programs and why I like the conscious work. And we can talk about how it plays in with fertility as well, and baby manifestation. This actually wasn't my patient, but it was somebody who shared it. And I loved this case so much because it really is a great explanation of belief change. So she was around 45. She was a lawyer, and she had become aware that she was somehow sabotaging relationships. No matter what relationship she went in, like, she would find some not such great guys in her opinion, but she actually realized she found some good guys too. But for some reason, even she knew there was a button, and she knew she shouldn't push that button, but she would push the button even in her mind when she knew this isn't going to work out, and the relationship would collapse. So at her clinical hypnotherapy session, she got regressed. And in this regression, she's experiencing herself as a 4-year-old, and she's remembering her mom is making dinner for her and her older sister, who's around 7. And she promises the girls that they get popsicles if they eat all their dinner. So her older sister eats her dinner fairly quickly and gets a popsicle. And she being 4, living in that theta brainwave, living in the moment, is not eating quickly. And all of a sudden she sees her sister with a popsicle, and she goes, I want a popsicle. And her mom's tired, end of day. And she angrily says, no, you haven't eaten your dinner. You don't get your dinner until you don't get your popsicle till you finish your dinner. And it probably wasn't said in a loving way. And this triggered the 4-year-old. And like many 4-year-olds, she got, she had a little 4-year-old temper tantrum, and that set off her mom. And then she got sent off to her room without dinner and without popsicle. And in her story, she's thinking in her dialogue that mommy likes and loves my sister more than me. Mommy doesn't love me. I'm not lovable. And she has this aha moment when that program really started for her. I'm not lovable. Now, remember I said the subconscious and the conscious want congruency. The heart and mind want congruency. When it conflicts, the heart, the Shen, the subconscious wins. And so she would have a relationship. And if this guy was doting and loving her, her subconscious goes, that's not who we are. We're unlovable. And she would consciously or unconsciously sabotage the relationship. So in hypnotherapy work, we're able to bring her 45-year-old self back and reparent, do inner child work and shift that. And I often say in my practice, I have an approach, notice, accept, choose again. Notice everything is neutral and we give it meaning. Right. Neutral. She just did not get a popsicle. Neutral. The meaning she gave it was I'm not lovable, right? And children that are in theta, meaning they're sponges. They don't have that prefrontal development to discern things. They just take things in, and we don't know why. But if you're a product of divorce, which a lot of people are, it usually for the children, it does some form of scarring, subconscious scarring, right? Because the children feel like they're responsible. It's their fault. True. So guilt shows up or shame shows up, not safe. So all these programs come up. And when I distill them down, I see people that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I see people that can't afford my services, right? And based on what they get paid, right? Mm-hmm. And when you distill it down, the stories can be very different. But when you distill it down, it's I'm not enough, right? I'm not lovable. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not thin enough. I'm not smart enough. It's kind of I'm not enough when you distill it down, whether you're worth a couple $100 million or whether you're scraping things together. So notice everything is neutral. We give it meaning. And when we believe in the story, we make it real. So this is not to believe in the story. And that's kind of that materialistic side, right? Mm-hmm. And we use these tools, conscious work, to go in and clean up the operating system. And here's an important point I want to share with our listeners is, you have this hardware, but the hardware functions depending on the software. And I got multiple stories like this, but I'll give you a couple. They have done research on those with multiple personality disorders. And depending on the personality, right? One will need reading glasses, one will not. One's blood test will be diabetic and the other one will not, right?
Yep. One's allergic to orange juice.
Yeah, one will be allergic to right? So same physical body. Yeah. So from a materialistic point of view, this makes no sense. But from a quantum perspective, it does, right?
Right.
And we've heard people with near-death experiences. I've heard through a colleague of one before, and I met one recently, actually, and she's written a book on it, Anita,
I love her. Yeah, she's great, amazing. Right? Yeah.
So, her story is she developed cancer. Funny thing, not so funny, but she always had a fear that she would die and get cancer. So, you got to be careful where you're putting your focus, right?
Yeah.
She did everything she could to not get cancer, and she got cancer, and she was ridden with tumors. And she's in the hospital, and her husband's by her side. And the story goes that she goes unconscious. So they say goodbye. This is it. She's going to die, and they got her on some medications too, I believe, for pain relief. And I think it was a day or two later, she opens her eyes, and she has an experience of a near-death experience where we won't go into it today, where she sees other family members or beings, but not their personalities. Like she just knew who they were, but she realizes she's coming back, and she knew she was coming back different. It wasn't like a full lobotomy, like a 180-degree turn, but she had a personality change, right? And she knew her cancer is gone. And when she woke up, she tried to convince her husband her cancer was gone. And he's like, no, they got the doctors. She was able to share stories, conversations that they had outside when she was in the coma in another room. She verbatim, she could, she knew what the doctor's shoes looked like, right? Everything.
Right. Because that's that bird's eye view.
She was outside the body.
Yeah.
But her cancer went away without any medication after that. She woke up from the coma and her cancer just resolved itself. So there's that personality. So her personality changed and her physical body changed, right? Mm-hmm. Because of this. And going back to our friend Joe Dispenza, Dr. Joe Dispenza, and your listeners, check out his book, They're Supernatural, The Placebo, and Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. That's a really good one.
That's a good one to start with, I think. Yeah.
Right. It's a good one to start with. But he talks about you can use matter to change matter, which can be slow. That's for our fertility patients, taking supplements. That's IVF. That's diet. Matter change matter. Or you can use energy to change matter, which can be spontaneous, like what happened with Anita, when her cancer went away, right?
Spontaneous
It went away
remissions. I
pretty
mean, there's a
quickly,
lot of
right?
them. There's people with, well, we see it all the time at Joe Dispenza's work.
Yeah.
Stage 4 cancer, just it goes away.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's working with a different dimension of yourself, right? If you want to speak. So the conscious work that I use is how to tap into that, how to tune into it. And it came from my experience, right? I've learned this and developed this from many people I've studied with, and I'm a kinesthetic learner. That's why I've learned Psyche, EFT, Marissa Peer's rapid transformational therapy, Ericksonian, NLP. Like, I just love it. Right. I think it started from insecurity, not enough, not smart enough. So I kept on doing things which brought me my success outside, but inside I wasn't enough. So I kept on learning and learning and learning. And then eventually, you're brought to your knees, which I was, debilitating anxiety. And I go in and do the inner work, and I have the transformation. And then I'm kind of at peace, don't feel like I need to do too much. But now there's this new drive, this overflowing wanted to share. It's a different feeling. It comes from peace. It doesn't exhaust you, right?
Yeah.
And so I think on the outside, if I was looking at me, I look similar, as in go, 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 always learning, always doing, right? But I was coming from fear and lack for many years, my doing and stuff. So my doing just got me more fear and lack because I could never fill that void. Now I'm going, but it's coming from feeling more whole and complete. And I'm not attached, whether I do it or not, right?
Yeah.
I'm not attached to it so much. But yet I'm still doing it. But now I feel charged by it.
That's so great. I mean, don't you see the yin and the yang too in a lot of this work?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
The balance, the harmony, the
and
flow.
You got to keep going into the yin. So then you have the yang, and it happens, right? So yin, I go inside, I become quiet, and then all of a sudden, all this activity and inspired thought comes through me, and then I want to go and see if I can manifest it, right?
Yeah, and everything kind of goes in pulses. There's pulses even with like experiences that we have in life. There's ebbs and flows. I think that we get impatient, or we think that it's going to be forever, but nothing lasts forever. It's like the good news and the bad news. Nothing lasts forever.
Right. Yeah, it's the good news and the bad news. Yeah, in that sense, don't be attached.
Yeah, true.
Right, which is a practice.
It is, and it's something that the ancients have been telling us this whole time. They've told us to go within. They've told us not to be too attached, to learn from nature, to learn from what's around us, and to flow with it.
And a tip for our listeners, because again, I teach what I've experienced. Many people may be going, well, I've read these books and I know all this stuff and I haven't had a shift. I was that guy where I had read everything and took courses, but I didn't do the process work. I conceptually understood it. I could teach it, but I wasn't living it. And it wasn't until I actually did the process work that the transformation started happening and the awakening started happening. And so that's kind of, with my patients, when I work with them, they want to get in the head and understand, which I love. We got to understand, when you understand the why behind it, they say that the how becomes easier. The why is, how does it work? And then the how is, what are you going to do? But if it's just an intellectual discussion, you'll have a mind shift, but you won't have a trait change. And what's the difference? A mind shift is that temporary, you feel excited. This makes sense. Feels excited, but it's a shift. It's like when you pull an elastic band apart, it's neuroelasticity. It stretches out. This feels good. But within an hour or two or a day or two, it goes back to its normal shape. So you haven't made a neuroplastic change. You just made a mindset shift.
Yes.
And if you do that daily, multiple times, it eventually become neuroplastic. And what I mean neuroplastic is if you stretch out a piece of soft plastic and you let go, it stays stretched. So that's the trait change.
Right.
So repetition, or doing many things that create a mind shift regularly, often will give you neuroplastic changes, right? That becomes a trait. That's that, do certain actions over and over again. So that's one way. But then there's other faster ways to do neuroplastic changes, which doesn't just require repetition. That is one of them. But there's other processes I use, part of my hypnosis practices and other energy psychology tools is what they're often called now, to help make that neuroplastic change, not just from repetition, but from doing these process work. And we call it process work because it's not done. It's a bottom up process versus a top down. So I'm not a counselor or a therapist. That would be somebody who's doing a top down. Let's talk about this. And there's some benefit to it. The clinical hypnotherapist perspective is a bottom up, meaning your Tara Bach said this once, your issues are stuck in your tissues. So when you have these emotions, rarely does somebody say, I feel it in my head. It does happen
somatic.
once in a while. Most
Yeah.
people feel it in their throat, in their chest, in their stomach. It's in your cells. And we got science to talk about how the microbiome
Yeah,
changes with
they've done
stress and emotions.
thermography images of people, all people that were angry, all people that were sad, and they would notice that it would light up in certain spots consistently in the body, which is really fascinating. You can probably find it online.
That's cool.
Yeah, very
Absolutely.
cool.
And we know, like, we got serotonin receptors in the gut. Now the heart's being known as a second brain. You may have more what they're reading off of more than the brain.
Right.
And then Dispenza and HeartMath talk about heart-brain coherence.
Right.
So where, I look at it this way is, back in the day of Galileo and Newton, the days when we thought that the sun revolved around the earth and the earth was flat. It was hard for society to shift and science to shift, right? Because everything we understood, the way we could look, it was like, no, the world's flat. Look at it. You can tell. Look outside. It doesn't look round. Or look, you can tell that the sun is going around the earth. Look in the sky. It's so obvious. And you can't tell me the earth is spinning, and we would feel it, right?
Right.
And now today, most people
Yeah.
realize that the earth is round, not flat. There are so few flatters out there.
I know.
They realize the
People
earth
do
is
that.
spinning and
Yeah.
that the earth goes around the sun. But there's your perception. There's the first floor view. From my view, the sun is going around the earth. I see it rise and set, right? I can see it float around. I'm standing still. I'm pretty sure about it. But that's an illusion. It's not a complete, correct perception on that first floor. When you go to a higher floor, so in this case, when we go into space, we can see that it's actually the earth that goes around the sun and the earth is round. And then if we go to a higher floor, we're going to probably get a whole other understanding of what's going on this human experience and purpose and what's your individual purpose. And people have spoken of it. I haven't tapped into that aspect. I've had those non-medicated, so non-psychedelic experiences where I've tapped into profound peace, where I've tapped into bliss.
Yeah.
I've also, through psychedelics, I've only done it once, I'll never do it again, where I tapped into my shadow, right? Accelerated my journey, but I wouldn't wish that upon anybody going into my shadow work unprepared.
Yeah, because if you have to be ready for it. That's exactly.
I wasn't ready for it.
Yeah.
I cheated. I cheated with psychedelics, and it put me into my shadow. I'm grateful now because, and here's a litmus test for myself, so I share this with the listeners as well. If you don't like your life now, then I'm pretty sure you're still living in kind of a victim mode. You don't like your past, and you'll have all the evidence to say why you don't like it. And if you can love your past, no matter how bad it is, then I know you love your now. I know you love your life. Why? Because you realize that who you are today is based on everything that's happened to you. And because you love where you are today, you would never want to change your past because you love your day. Doesn't mean you'd want to relive your past, but you're grateful for it. You don't regret it because you love today. But if you hate your past, then I'm pretty sure you really don't love your day. And there are some terrible things that have happened to people. And I've seen people have had terrible acts done to them. They would never ask to go do it again.
Right.
But they also say, I love my life now. And so I wouldn't change anything in my past. So that shows you that's healed, right? That vibration that's healed. And so, because there's only this moment. So I find conscious work powerful. When you bring it to reproductive health, I want to quote our Randine Lewis friend who wrote the book, The Infertility Cure, and many books. But I remember hearing her talk about when women get into a later stage of their reproductive years, especially into their 40s, she said, at the beginning, reproduction it's a youth game, jing. We call it essence jing. It's the physicality, right? You got to have good physicality, and that happens with the youth. We see it around us, right? Like a 90-year-old and a 20-year-old, the same person, are different physically. But there's something about spiritual maturity, and sometimes, and this is where it kind of ties into Dr. Joe Dispenza, matter change matter. So that's the physical, the jing. And then there's energy that can change matter. And that's what we call the Shen, the spirit, tapping into that consciousness. And she says, when you're younger, you can be spiritually mature because you have such good jing, it overrides everything. And so you can be a drug addict in your 20s and getting pregnant all the time, right? Poorly eating, all that stuff. And then if you get into your 40s, the physicality you want, but it's not enough. You need to, as she said, have your shit together. So that's, I'm quoting her.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's when we see what we call miracles. It overrides the physical, and you really need to do that the spiritual maturity happens. And so, have both. And to add to that, her excitement with donor egg back in the day when we were having this conversation was she couldn't wait to meet the children that were born through donor egg cycles, because she says currently, this was way back when in early 2000, people were born with either young mothers, so physically strong, spiritually immature, they're in their 20s or early 30s, or they're born with women in their early 40s, physically not as strong, but spiritually more mature. So they didn't have both. She goes, but with the donor egg cycle, they get the gene from the egg, so a physically strong younger woman, and they are gestated and raised by spiritually mature women. It's going to be the first time where they get both strength from the physical and strength from the spiritual.
That's so interesting. That's a really cool way to look at it.
Different perspective to look at the donor egg. She was like, I wonder what kind of children these are going to be, right?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And actually, it's really interesting. I don't know if you've seen this yourself, but sometimes the donor egg in the child looks like the mother.
Yeah, well, not surprising. I can't quote you on this, but I remember that they've done this in animals where you put him in a different, like, I don't know, a donkey into a horse or something like, and it comes out looking more like the mother, like the horse. So, because don't forget, you start as, a bunch of cells, right? When you go in and you're grown. So you are influenced because you're taking in, and Chinese medicine talks about this, the emotional well-being of the mother during pregnancy will impact the nervous system and the emotional personality of that child. And so what you're eating and what you're doing is helping grow that child. So we have what we call prenatal Jing, for our listeners. So you get that from the mother, the father, and then throughout pregnancy. And then postnatal Jing is what happens after you're born. So your diet, lifestyle. And so everything is impacting you up until you're born. That's what we call your genes. And in Chinese medicine, we call pre-genetic destination, right?
Yeah,
prenatal essence. I don't know if I said if I used the right word. Prenatal essence or prenatal Jing is what happens. So yeah, I love that story that she looked a little bit like the mother. Not surprising.
Yeah, and I've actually seen it because one of them, she's somebody that I'm friends with on Facebook, and she's also been on the podcast. Nancy Weiss, she's a spirit baby medium, which is a whole other interesting topic. But she had donor embryos, and one of her daughters, she put a side-by-side picture of herself when she was younger and the daughter, and it was crazy how similar they looked. And then I've heard another story of somebody with freckles, that she's had freckles, but the mother of the donor did not, and her husband did not. So she always wanted a child with freckles, and sure enough, one of them got freckles.
Very cute. Yeah, and there's so much things we don't understand. And the donor egg cycle, I don't know if you've seen this, but with my patients, they only have one regret, and it's a great regret that I've always heard when I've heard any regrets. I don't hear it often, but I hear it. And they say that the only regret I have is that I didn't do this donor egg cycle sooner, because I realized I could have been with this baby earlier. I waited, because they're doing other things, and understand there's a process to come to this place where we're ready to do donor egg. But that's a great regret, meaning they love this baby, like from day one implantation, right? They have this connection. They're their mother, and that's great news, right? Because so many people understandably have to get their head around about not using their own genetic material.
It's true. Yeah.
And when you get there, when you surrender, which is part of conscious work, right? And the resistance drops and you get into flow and receptivity, the experience can be beautiful. And then regardless, even if you don't, when that baby's born, you're like, what the heck? I've been waiting for this forever.
Yes. And that's another thing. So looking at the same thing from different lenses and different perspectives, and then you can kind of think, okay, I may have wanted it to go this way, but perhaps it can go another way, and I'll still get the end goal, which is really to become a mother.
Yeah. Well, that's the end goal, and that's what we want to focus on. And from the conscious work, we hear so often in manifestation work and in teachers of consciousness, not to be attached to form and outcome. And I'm a practical guy. So the left brain, my math background, my accounting, I'm what I would say my feet are on the ground and my is in the clouds. Not just,
Mm-hmm.
some people either their head in their clouds. So some people in our industry just head in the clouds. So it's hard
Yeah.
to bring it to this earth. Or my
Mm-hmm.
old profession as accountant, their feet are on the ground, right?
Right.
I
Yeah.
feel like I'm doing both of that. And so I want to share this because this worked for me. And again, I often share is, it's easy to say, don't attach to form and outcome. Well, that's easy to say. You're not the one that you want this form and outcome.
Right.
So you can't fool the universe. You can't pretend, right? Really pretend.
That's true.
But you can do practices. And I have found this line, and I didn't come up with this. I heard this from somebody else and I was like, brilliant. And it works for me. And it's worked for hundreds of other people I've worked with. This or something better. I want this or something better.
Yeah,
that
well, I like
has
that.
such a different vibration to it because you didn't choose your desires. So I will never say you can't want this. You can't desire this because you didn't choose it. I prefer chocolate ice cream over strawberry. I can't tell you why. It is. I want chocolate ice cream. I don't really want strawberry ice cream. It's just what is. And so, but when you have a desperate need for it, that if I can't have this, then you create resistance and that impacts the field and that cannot be healthy. But if you have a desire, you want it, but you also know you're going to be okay whether you have it or not, that doesn't add resistance to the field.
Right.
And so often because if you get focused on it has to be this way, then you're not leaving yourself open to other things that can bring you that same experience, right? Because what does the baby bring to you, right? Why do you want the baby? What's it going to bring? What's going to be different? What are you going to experience? This kind of work, right?
Right.
Because then you could get little, I call them drift logs or kisses on the cheek from the universe where what it feels like, you're practicing what it feels like, and it's this or something better. And then all of a sudden, that same experience comes to you, but it's a different manifestation physically. Right. So you're like, oh, getting that feeling. And so you're starting to get it from other places as well. You're experiencing it. And when I say get it from other places, I want to use that loosely is you have learned to elicit that experience inside of you. And then you're starting to see it manifested on the outside. So, because you don't want to have to get it from the outside, because again, then you're not whole and complete. This whole work is about becoming whole and complete, where
Correct.
You're making it inside of you. You're tapped into a part of yourself higher than, I guess, the ego self, to use that language. And then it becomes fun to see if you can manifest it on the outside, but you're already experiencing the feeling. Hence, it's easy not to be attached because you're already feeling the joy or the love or the nurturing of something else, right? The being of service to something else. You're already bringing up that experience. So you don't need it on the outside, but then all of a sudden you see it on the outside and that just bumps it up a bit. It amplifies it. And so but it's temporary, that amplification. And then when you come back to your set point, that set point is peace and joy anyhow. So you're good.
So it's unconditional peace and joy. It doesn't have a condition on it. You choose to just have that. And so you can, and I think that that's the big thing, is that people don't realize that they can actually do that. They could bring it up through just meditation and different practices, that they can bring it up in themselves.
Yeah, you tap into that. And I mean, I've had that. I have glimpses, I have experiences of it. And for now, the language is I'm tapping into my true nature, and everybody has this true nature, your witness consciousness, your higher self, you want to give it a word. And I think we might have talked about this when I interviewed you on the Conscious Fertility Podcast, but it's not all positive, feels good. You still get uncomfortable feelings. You're just not at the full effect of them. So you experience the sadness, you can experience fear, you can experience guilt or hopelessness, but it moves through you like a song on a radio, 90 seconds, and it passes through you. And then you're back to that peace. And so if you're able to not get into the story and you can experience it, you still feel these uncomfortable feelings, but there's could be an underlying peace or even beauty behind some of those feelings. You're just not at the full effect of them, and they just don't last for weeks.
Yeah, well, The Untethered Soul, I think that was like a big game changer for me, that book.
Michael Singer's book.
Michael Singer, he's amazing. And I think that it really was about like allowing discomfort to happen without judgment, without that kind of good or bad, that neutrality, just kind of allowing it to happen. And I have an example because I burned myself. I remember it was a Friday night and I was exhausted. I was so tired. I couldn't wait to sleep. And I burned my thumb. And I was like, man, and it was a stupid thing because I was so tired and I touched something and I knew I shouldn't have done it. It was just like without thinking. And I was like, how am I going to sleep with this burning sensation? It was like the worst feeling ever. You know, it's like when you first burn yourself. And I remember thinking to myself, maybe it was like my higher guidance, something, don't resist the burn. So I was like, okay, let me try this. And I literally I closed my eyes and like, I imagined myself just kind of going through the fire with my hand and almost accepting it, inviting it, allowing it. And literally within 5 minutes, the burn went away.
Yeah, and that's the quantum, that's energy changing matter. And you use the awesome word resistance, right? Resistance is futile, to quote the board from Star Trek.
Yeah.
Resistance is futile for those Trekkies out there. When you add resistance, basically you amplify the burn, you amplify the suffering, or take from the Buddhist quote, pain is inevitable, the burn hurts. Suffering is optional. That's where you amplify it. And when you can lean into it versus it's counterintuitive because we should run away from it, we think, right? And I had that similar experience in the 90s. I read Dr. Joe Dispenza's book, but I didn't understand it. I kind of read it, but it didn't catch very much of it the first read. And one day when I was studying to write the exams to become a chartered accountant, a CPA, I had sadness come over me, and it was a new thing. It wasn't something I really experienced, this kind of sadness that I could recall. And I don't know why I did this, but there's, again, another part of you leading the way here. Mm-hmm. I decided to, in the middle of the day, I had shared accommodations. I was living with a female, and she had Yanni and the Ghetto Blaster. Back in the day, it was Ghetto Blasters. With cassettes, maybe CDs. She had some incense burner, so I lit that, and there was like lavender rose in it. And I went in the bath and just decided to experience the sadness. So as I'm listening to the sad music, there's some incense and candlelit in the middle of the day in the bath, hot bath. I'm so going into the sadness, tears are rolling down my eyes, and in a moment, I'm in full bliss. Like I'm like bliss, like what I don't do drugs, but except for that psychedelic experience, what a good high would be. Like it was like, and honestly, if that's what it feels like, I understand why people would do drugs. It was just bliss. And I'm like, try to be sad. Cause I was like, this feels great. Can I be sadder? I couldn't be sad. And it was only later, I had that experience first. And then I read Dispenza's book. Sorry, not Dispenza, Eckhart Tolle's book. Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now is what I meant.
Amazing book.
And the line where he says, when you're present, you can't suffer, because when you're regretting the past or fearing the future, you're not in the present. But if you're in the present, he says, even sadness can be turned into bliss. And when I read that line in the book, I had my aha moment because I had that experience. And now the process that I do in my conscious work is about lowering the resistance. Somebody says, what are you doing? You're tuning into your witness consciousness. You mentioned Michael Singer, the Untethered Soul. He often says he doesn't use tools or do tools, but he kind of does. And I have a process that I believe brings down the resistance. My experience, people I've worked with, and then you have that flow and receptivity. And sometimes I just have peace. Maybe it's if I'm frustrated or fear, it's a 7 out of 10. It'll come down to say a 2 or a 1. So peace in an unhappy situation still, right? But peace. So
it's
the resistance
flow,
is low.
finding flow, finding flow in that moment. And it's interesting because my litmus test is, are you present? Really, that's the question. A lot of people that I work with is, are you present? Like, because many times when they share things that are uncomfortable for them, they're not really in the present moment. They're either expecting a future or thinking about a past or something that happens. So the present moment's always the antidote to everything.
Being present.
Master
and
that.
That's what the mind does. It's the nature of the mind. You can't get mad at the mind for thinking, because that's its nature. To be like getting upset with water for being wet. Right? It's its nature. So you're fighting with reality. However, there's tools to help you get present, and these uncomfortable feelings can become portals to presence. Right. And you're not wallowing them and embellishing them. You're not inflating them. You're leaning into them and observing them. So I think what's happening, my experience, my understanding to this point, is when we really get practice at noticing and observing them and accepting them, I think we go into present moment, but we do this by tuning into our witness consciousness, because the mere fact of witnessing them, it shouldn't be this way. It's not fair. Like getting into
being
the head,
a watcher, neutral watcher.
You get into the watching, just getting practice at watching. Then you tune into your witness consciousness, and that nature of you is peace and joy. So you tune into it. So wherever you put your energy is what's going to grow. So if you believe in the story and you're at the effect of the story, then you're unconscious and you're experiencing it. You're suffering, right? Now you've amplified the negative situation. If you're able to observe it, I'm not saying you like it. We're not doing a spiritual bypass here, but getting practice at observing it, I believe you tune into the witness consciousness and its nature's peace and joy. And how the metaphor I use for this, Michelle, is tell me how this lands for you. And I'm curious for your audience, because this for me was my another aha moment, just like what's going on here? Because I'm having these experiences and I want to have language to share with the people I work with. So if you bite an apple, you have to consciously, Michelle, ego Michelle, has to pick up the apple and chew it. But after that, Michelle, you're not going, release salivary enzymes in your mouth. Like, I got to do that. Nobody talk to me. Right. Nobody talk to me. Yeah. I'm getting acid into my stomach now.
Right.
Okay. I cannot walk up the stairs because my intestines are now absorbing all these B vitamins.
Right.
Same thing when you sleep. When you go to sleep, you're unconscious. You're not breathing yourself. You're not pumping your blood or pumping your heart, circulating your blood. Your autonomic nervous system is doing this. Another part, your subconscious program is doing this, right? The autonomic nervous system. Well, same thing. I don't believe, for me, that I let go of these programs or emotions anymore. Not Lorne Brown ego. Just like I don't release the salivary enzyme. I believe it's my witness consciousness does this. It's what's metabolizing these uncomfortable feelings of the old programs. And how do we do this? Well, first you have to make the unconscious conscious. So that's my notice step. Everything is neutral, and then we give it meaning. Don't believe in the story. When you do, you make it real. So don't take it personally. Then I have multiple tools during the accepting part to surrender to what is, not fight it. Doesn't mean you're resigned to it. Doesn't mean you like it. We're just accepting that this is how I feel right now. And you accept it and you start to observe it and get this is a skill. You get practice at observing it. And by that observing, you tune into the witness consciousness, and it is what lets go of the feelings. It's what metabolizes it.
It's the intelligence. That's the divine intelligence.
It's the intelligence.
Yeah.
And so give it a consciousness, divine. I don't know if it's a part of me or part. I don't know. All I know is Lorne Brown is not doing it. Yeah. Just like Lorne Brown gets to choose to bite the apple, Lorne Brown gets to choose to notice, not take it personally, and observe it. That's all I do.
Right.
The digestion of the apple is outside of my ego, my conscious mind. The digestion and the alchemy of these emotions where I was sad, went from sad to bliss, right? Or go from fear to just feeling at peace. I'm not doing that. I don't believe I let go of it. And this ties into Michael Singer's. He says that these, I don't know what he calls them, sankaras or something, these energy blocks, they're there. So you're not experiencing your true nature. You're all blocked up with these old programs and beliefs and feelings. But when they get released, they move up and out. You have this space now where you get to experience yourself. So that's how he describes it.
Right.
You
could find it so many different ways.
Yeah. The bottom line is you got to do the work. That's my point. Yeah. It's nice to understand. A lot of us cannot confirm or prove anything, but when you have the experience, you don't care because the experience is peace, and peace is nice.
It is. I agree. I agree with you.
I'm not at the stage where I can equally treat fear and peace, or fear and love together. Like some people say, you get to a place where you don't judge either. They're just vibrations. You're okay. I definitely prefer peace and joy and bliss over fear, shame, guilt. Just so
it doesn't feel right. I mean, really, our true default, I think, is in that nature, and that's the Buddha nature. That's kind of like our original form, and we learn the other things. We get habituated through habits. So bringing this into fertility, which I think is actually very relevant, even though it's kind of like this big grand concept, it could totally apply to going through IVF, going through the resistance. And also in the IVF, you get so focused on the numbers and the analytical, whereas sometimes you need to kind of move back and allow yourself the space and the joy, and to really take care of your well-being. And that's kind of like my big thing about that, which always tends to kind of fall in the back burner.
Yeah. Yeah, you're going through the journey anyhow. So that's the whole thing. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. I don't think anybody would want to go through an IVF. However, if you're going through it, you could go kicking and screaming and suffer through it, or you can go through it and not amplify the difficulties of it. And that again is a skill set, because IVF is not easy. As you
No, it's
know,
not,
the
for
research
sure.
shows it's like getting a cancer diagnosis or terminal diagnosis in
Yeah.
fertility. So I want to clarify that we're not dismissing it. The conscious work is about being authentic. It's actually about feeling your feelings,
Right.
however, with a different lens, and developing a skill set, a process, so you can metabolize it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're going to go on this journey, if you're in this journey, you didn't choose it, but you're in it. And so how do you use it as they say in the conscious teachings? How do you make it how is this happening for you versus to you? What does that mean? How do I get out of victim mode, because it doesn't serve you, to being accountable, responsible? What does that mean, accountable, responsible? It does not mean you blame yourself or you blame other. Accountable, responsible means that if you're having the experience, then that's all you need to know, that you're responsible for healing it, because you're the one having the experience. If it wasn't your responsibility, then you wouldn't be having that experience. And there's so many experiences happening around the world at one time, and each individual is only aware of so many. The ones that they're aware of that are triggering them, that they're experiencing, that's all you need to know. That means you're accountable, responsible for that. The stuff that's happening around the world that doesn't trigger you, it's not your responsibility to do the inner work around it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can keep talking to you for forever. And of course, we just talked about one subject, so perhaps I'll bring you back for other ones as well. But this is definitely the kind of thing that I'm very interested in, and I nerd out on this all the time. It really is something I think about every single day. I think that it is when you really are bringing up your consciousness and becoming more aware in your life, and really being the creator of your life, or owning that you are a creator in your life. I just think it brings another element of purpose and meaning to everything.
Yeah, we all want to be happy, and
Yeah.
we think different things outside of us will make us happy. This work brings that kind of happiness. And if to kind of wrap this part up on consciousness, from the materialistic and then the quantum perspective, when we're unconscious, or when we're in that state of fear, we don't feel safe, right? Then our body goes into survival mode, right? The fight or flight. And so our resources are not available for healing, creativity, and reproduction, because they're in survival mode. Blood gets drained from the thinking brain, the blood gets drained from the digestion, reproduction.
Right.
And so, but when you feel safe, which is what conscious work is, so here's on the material level, you free up resources for healing, creativity, and reproduction. And we know this, that the unsafe hormones of cortisol and adrenaline and epinephrine, all those things affect inflammation in the body. They affect your immune system, your hormonal system, your gut microbiome. And when you feel safe, you're releasing the serotonin, the dopamine, oxytocin, and they turn on and off genes for health and reproduction. So that's the material level. And then on the quantum level, there's more of this world that meets the eye. And you have multiple stories, and I have stories of women where it doesn't make sense on the material, Newtonian current medical research, that this woman's going to get pregnant based on her age, based on her FSH, AMH, based on her history. And then they go ahead and it happens, right?
Yeah.
And that's where Dispenza says energy changes matter. It's instantaneous. Or Randine says the Shen is key here. And that's where you tune in. And I want to clarify, I'm not saying, if you do conscious work, you'll get pregnant. Absolutely not. Just sharing that miracles can happen, or shifts can happen. And what I have found is people get to a place where they're okay. Whether they have baby or not, they know they're okay. And that means they have the flow and receptivity, so they feel happy. They still want the baby, but they're no longer in that state of desperation. They're no longer putting up the resistance that could be interfering with that flow and receptivity, which would be supportive of a healthy pregnancy.
Yeah. And it really comes down to the state of being and that state of flow. And so again, you were saying, about how it's not about taking out the things that are uncomfortable for us. And that's really the yin and yang balance, having both, the differences, and then having them be harmonious and work together and flow. I think ultimately it's like, I always say it, like when you're in flow, things start to work out. You're coasting.
Yeah, well, resources tend to flow to you when you're in flow and receptivity. When the resistance is low and you have flow and receptivity, things tend to flow to you. And we know in electrical systems that when there's resistance. We call it chi stagnation in Chinese medicine.
In our bodies,
the energy flows slower and it heats up the system in a bad way. And when the resistance is low in an electrical system, the energy flows better. So we're electrical, chemical, magnetic beings. And so when our resistance is up, we call it chi stagnation, call it resistance. You don't feel the flow and receptivity. We call it stress in the West. And when you are able to do the work to metabolize, to have that alchemy where you're changing these old programs that don't serve you, or metabolizing these uncomfortable feelings, then the resistance drops and now you have flow and receptivity. Your energy flows better.
For sure. So Lorne, this is a great conversation. I definitely feel like we connect on many levels. And I think it's really fun to be able to talk to somebody about this kind of work, especially somebody who's a colleague of mine and somebody I look up to. I think that you do a lot of great work. By the way, he also has Healthy Seminars, which is like a whole list or database of many courses for us A-born members within the fertility world. So he has a lot of background in this work. So thank you so much, Lorne, for coming on. And if you can also share how people can find you through your website and offerings.
2 ways. And then on that, you can find Instagram and all this stuff. There's the AcuBalance website, and it's with 1 C, acubalance.ca. The .ca stands for Canada, for my American listeners, acubalance.ca. Or the lornebrown.com will have links to stuff as well. And Lorne is spelled Lorne, so lornebrown.com. And obviously, I also want to direct you, both sites will have links to it, but the Conscious Fertility Podcast has lots of talks around consciousness and also around fertility as well. Like guests like Michelle are on there. And so I do invite you to listen to the Conscious Fertility Podcast. We put out usually once a week episodes.
Awesome. Well, Lorne, this is a great conversation. I knew it was going to be because I met you last week and we had a great conversation last week too. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you very much, Michelle.